Alright, so let's get into making the perfect microcoil, or somewhat perfect microcoil. Now, like I said, this video is going to be intended more for the new rebuilder out there, the people that are just starting rebuilding atomizers and coils, and kind of want to know what tools to use, how to do it, how to make the perfect coil. Now, when it comes to wire, everyone has their preference. When it comes to nickel, titanium, stainless, Kanthal. Personally, for me, the only two wires that I currently use at the moment are going to be either Kanthal wire or stainless steel wire. Now, stainless steel wire, you can use it on temperature control devices, and you can use it on power devices in regular wattage or power mode. Kanthal, on the other hand, you can only use it on power devices, wattage mode, power mode. You can't use Kanthal on temperature control devices. At least currently at the moment you can't. The differences between these two, it's very minor. You're not going to notice a huge night and day difference. I noticed that with stainless steel you get a little bit more cleaner, crisper taste than you do with Kanthal. Some of your e-liquids may taste a little bit better, a little bit cleaner tasting, but once again, it's not a night and day difference. Stainless steel wire is a little bit softer. I have noticed that stainless, it snaps a little bit easier. It's a little more delicate than Kanthal, so you got to be a little bit careful with it. For the majority, I've been using stainless lately, and I've been really enjoying it. Now, when it comes to wire gauges, you got a bunch of different options out there. You got anything all the way up to 36, all the way down, I think, to 18 gauge. And pretty much the difference is the higher the number, the thinner the wire. The lower the number, the thicker the wire. If you are building on a low wattage device, if you prefer low wattages, I recommend a higher gauge wire, maybe a 30 gauge, a 28 gauge, maybe a 26 gauge. Now, if you're sub-ohming, if you're building for mech mods, if you like high wattages, then you can venture into the lower gauge wires like your 26, 24, 22, 20 gauge. Personally, for me, when it comes to wire gauges, I like to stick to 26 gauge in my RTAs and my sub-ohm clearmizers. When it comes to RDAs, I like to use 24 gauge and 22 gauge. Now let's talk about some of the tools that you can use when building your coils. Now, there are a bunch of coiling jigs out there. You got your Kuru coiler, which you see right here. You got your Coil Master. You got your revolver coiling jig. You got the other style of coilers where you kind of wrap the wire yourself. And using all the different coilers out there, I've used quite a few. I always come back to the Kuru coiler. And I'm not sure why it is. It's probably because the Kuru is just very simple. There's no adjusting any screws. There's no unscrewing any rods. It comes exactly like this, and you just put your wire through and you start wrapping your coil. And I have never once had a bad coil with the Kuru coiler. Now, of course, everyone out there, doesn't have money to purchase a coiling tool, which is perfectly fine. This is my old screwdriver that I used to use when I made all my coils. If you guys remember my very first how to build a perfect microcoil video, you guys might remember this screwdriver, and this is the one I always used. Pretty much just hold it right here, wrap your coil around the screwdriver, and it worked. It works well. It's just that you have to spend a little bit more time building your coil, as opposed to using something like this where the coil kind of wraps itself. So if if you struggle with hand pain or fatigue in your hands or bad vision or whatnot, these types of coilers right here are a godsend. Now, when it comes to coil diameter, everyone has their preference. I mean, I've seen coils as thin as a paper clip and as thick as, I don't know, a pen. But personally, for me, I like to stick with 3 different sizes. I like to stick with my 2.5, my 2mm, and my 3mm. And the reason for that is, well, basically because the Kuru coilers only come in 3 sizes, but I sometimes venture off and build like larger coils or smaller coils on my screwdriver. But for the most part, the main 2 sizes that I use the most are going to be the 2mm and the 2.5 millimeter. Now the differences between the diameter coils, you know, honestly, I'm not really sure. If you build something really small, like say a 2 millimeter, it's gonna have, how can I put this? You're gonna get probably more vapor. It's gonna be a more dense, hotter vape as opposed to building a large diameter coil, because you got a lot more cotton stuffed inside that coil, and the actual wire, the coil, is not that close together. So it's not going to be as hot. It's not going to cook up that cotton, you know, and make it really hot. So I think the larger the diameter of the coil, the cooler vape, you know, the cooler the vape is going to be, and the more smaller the diameter, the more kind of warmer the vape, and the more kind of vapor you're going to get. At least that's how I kind of look at it. Recommended tools that I use, I always have a nice pair of wire snips. These are from my Coil Master coiling kit. These are really nice. You always want to have a good pair of wire clips or snips or wire cutters, whatever you want to call them, because, you know, when you build your coil, you want something that's going to fit really tight into the small little places to kind of clip those leads. I found that this Coil Master one kind of works perfectly because it has like a flat edge right here, and I could fit it into tight places. So you want to make sure you got a good pair of wire snips. Also, a pair of needle nose pliers or bent needle nose pliers really come in handy for pulling your coils tight. These are a must. I do recommend like any kind of plier, or, you know, miniature pliers, just because when you mount your coils, you want to pull everything nice and tight. So you're always going to be using some type of pliers. So make sure you have something similar in hand. Another innovation that came out, I don't know when these came, well, they've probably been out for a while, but just recently, like maybe about a year ago or so, I found these things. These are ceramic tip tweezers. And what the reason for the ceramic tip is, if you remember my first video when I did how to build a perfect microcoil, in order to compress the coils, I was using a torch, and I would torch the coil, and I would then compress it with my pliers. Well, the ceramic tip tweezers allow you to mount the coil in your atomizer, screw your atomizer onto your mod, and you can fire the mod, and at the same time, while you're firing the mod, you can compress the coil, and you won't short out your mod. If you're using like stainless steel, regular stainless steel tweezers or pliers, and you go to compress your coil while firing the mod, you're going to short out that coil, and that coil is going to pop. So I definitely recommend investing in a pair of ceramic tip tweezers. Another handy little tool that I use that I found a few months ago, comes in really handy for mounting coils, is this little coiling jig. Now, you know, this is made for making different size coils. If you look at the top right here, you'll see the different diameters on the rod. And why this is helpful is because when you wrap your coil on these coiling rods, they're too fat to fit onto the RDA or the atomizer, because this part right here kind of gets in the way. So the way I found to do it to make it much easier is I make my coil using the coil jig, and then once it's made, I transfer it onto here, and using this tool will allow me to mount the coil onto the RDA. I could do center posts really, really easily, and it's just a much smaller tool, and it's just much easier to maneuver inside of an RDA or an RTA. Also, the most important thing that you want to have when you're building a coil is have a mod, and an atomizer, and a vape already set up, because during the building process, you're going to want a vape. And yeah, if you don't have a mod already sitting next to you ready to be vaped while you're building, you're going to get pretty annoyed. So make sure you got a mod that's ready to go so that you can vape throughout your build. Alright, so in this video, we're just going to focus on a basic microcoil. We're not going to do anything fancy. I will have a few follow-up videos showing you guys how to make a twisted coil, how to do a parallel coil, maybe even a Clapton coil. But for this particular video, we're just going to keep it real simple for those people out there that are new to rebuilding, and we're just going to keep it to a simple microcoil. Nothing fancy. So the way I measure my wire, you know, for each coil, I just do one pretty much turn around the spool. So if I'm doing dual coils, I'll do 2 turns, 1, 2, and then that's going to be pretty much the length I need. You know, it's always good to have too much wire, because if you cut too little wire, you got to kind of start over again. Wire is really, really cheap. You could pick up Canthal for like $7 for 100 feet. So don't think that you're wasting wire, because it's really, really cheap. What you want to do is just kind of fold the wire like so, and then just cut it right in the center, so that way you have 2 even pieces. Grab your coiling tool. We're going to do a 2.5. Now, if you guys are interested in how these things work, or a review on these, I do have a review for the Kuru coiler, also the Coil Master, and also the revolver coiling jigs, to show you guys how to properly use these things. But pretty much all you're going to do, take your wire, you're going to see in a hole at the top, just kind of slide it through, and just have it stick out just a little bit, enough for your finger to hold it down. Grab the top cap, make sure the wire is going over the top, as you see there. Take the top cap, make sure the set screw is behind the wire, like so. And you don't want to put force on this thing. You just want to push it down. And then as you twist it, try not to put any pressure on it, because if you push it down, you're going to end up, the leads are going to wrap over themselves. So try not to put a lot of pressure on it, but just put enough pressure just to hold the top cap in place. It's kind of hard to explain, but once you get one of these in your hand, you kind of got to get a feeling for it. But we're going to do, let's do 10 wraps here, all right? So each time this screw head passes me, that's going to be one wrap, one complete wrap. Let's do 10 wraps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And depending on what you're building, an RDA or RTA, depends on which way you want the leads to go. So we're going to throw this onto an RDA, so we want the leads to both be facing us. So I'm going to pull that off here. There's a coil. Now we're not quite finished yet. I like to take the coil off, put it back on, so that way we can fix the ends. And this is where with the pliers, they come in really handy. What you want to do is kind of snug on these leads nice and tight, so that way you get a nice tight coil. If you got a loose coil, you're going to get hot spots. And as you can see, my leads are kind of like one going that way, one going down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top cap, I'm going to pop it back on, and I'm going to just kind of straighten up those leads so they're both facing the same direction. Now, depending on the type of atomizer you're building, like for instance, if you have post holes that are like kind of centered like that, or if you have offset post holes where one's lower than the other, like say I want to put one lead down here and one lead up here. If the post holes are offset, you can go ahead and leave your coil like this, and you'll see one coil's on top and then one lead's kind of on the bottom. And that's perfect for building a velocity style deck like this, because we're going to have one lead down here and then one up here. So that's perfect. But if we're building an RDA that has even post holes, like say the tugboat or something like that, where the holes kind of look like that, they're both the same height, what I found that works really well is take the coil, pop it back on to the coiling rod or screwdriver, whatever, take your pliers, and you want to pinch the wire right at the coil. So let me see if I can show you guys this. If you see what I'm doing here, just grab those leads right there, and then just squeeze your pliers. There we go. I'm just kind of squeezing them right there. And then your leads are once again going to be kind of off. So what you want to do, grab the top cap again, kind of straighten them out. And there we go. Now we have both the leads on the bottom like so. So if you're mounting this on a RDA that has the post holes at the same height, this is going to be more of an ideal kind of coil build right here. And I'm just going to make one more coil. Once again, you want to have enough wire hanging out the side right there. That's going to be your lead. Have the wire going over the top. Pop your top cap on. Make sure that set screw is behind the wire. And once again, don't put too much pressure, but just enough so that the top cap stays down like that. And then you could start wrapping. There we go. Pop the coil off. Flip it around. Pop it back on again. Take your pliers. Pull those legs down nice and tight. That will tighten up the coil. Straighten out the legs. Now they're nice and straight. If you're building, once again, on a RDA that has straight post holes, crimp the leads right there, nice and tight. Kind of give it a little bit of a bend. Grab your top cap again. Straighten up those leads. And there we go. So now we have two 10 wrap, 2.5, 24 gauge dual coils. All right, so since all the post holes are pretty much all the same height, as you can see there, since we bent the coil leads kind of straight like that, you can see everything's gonna line up nice and straight. Another cool little trick is make sure you cut the wire leads one longer than the other, so that way it's much easier to kind of start the wire leads through the post hole. Now there are two different types of builds that you could do. A really popular one is called a center post build, and what that means is the coil pretty much is right in the center, and this is probably one of the most efficient ways to do a build because you have even wicking on both sides, so e-liquid is feeding to the coil evenly on both sides. You could pull the cotton through, have some cotton on this side, have some cotton on that side, and you know, that's one way to do a build. A little bit more trickier sometimes, but you know, the payoff is worth it. Or you could do just a standard build where you put the wire leads through each post hole right there, and then your coil kind of sits off to the side like this. And you know, those are okay too. There's no major issue with those. It's just that wicking isn't as even since you have more cotton on this side than you do this side. The wicking is not as efficient. So I just much prefer to do center post build, so that way we have even wicking on both sides. Now for a center post build, you're going to want to use the opposite positive post hole. So this being your negative post hole right here, if you were going to do a standard build, you put the positive lead into this hole right here. But since we're going to do a center post and we're going to need to push the coil over a little bit, you kind of want to put your positive lead on the opposite side right there. So just take your coil, pop it through, and this is where this tool right here comes in really, really handy. Now, since we built a 2.5 millimeter diameter coil, we're going to slide the coil till we hit the 2.5 diameter setting right here. So I'm going to take this coiling tool, slide it right there. Now what I like to do, take my pliers and just give the coil leads a little tug to kind of tighten it up. And then what you're going to do for a center post build, this is the way I prefer to do it. I know a lot of other people have their own ways of doing it, but you simply just take the coil, kind of just give it a little push, and just kind of center it. So about right there looks about good. And then push the rod down against the deck like so. So that way you kind of brace the coil, so that way you can tighten it down. Take your finger, place it over the coil, then go ahead, grab your screwdriver, your Allen wrench, and tighten down the post screws. Now when you're using a thinner gauge wire like a 32, a 30, a 28, 26, if you tighten down your post screws too tight, you're going to end up snapping the wire leads, and you're going to have to start all over again. When you're using a thicker gauge wire, it's a little bit harder to snap the wire. And also, if you're using sometimes a cheaper RDA, the post screws will be really sharp and they'll cut through the wire. So don't crank down the post screws really super tight because you'll end up snapping those leads. And there you go. Once it's all tight, you could pretty much take your wire clippers and cut off those leads. Now, a lot of people sometimes like to pull on the lead and kind of twist it so it snaps off right at the post screw. I don't like to do that because, I don't know, sometimes I've had issues where it loosens up the coil, or it'll snap the coil or loosen up the screw. So I much prefer just to use wire cutters and kind of just clip the lead. Make sure, though, that you clip the lead as close as possible, because you don't want the coil touching the end of that lead on the other side, because if you do, you'll get a hot spot. So do your best at cutting it as close as possible. And you don't have to worry about straightening the coil or anything like that. We could do that after we mount the other coil. Pretty much slide out the coiling rod, and then you have coil number 1. Now, one thing you might have to do, depending on your atomizer, as you can see, that post hole for the other screw is kind of blocked by the coil. So what you could do, you can either take the coil and you can raise it completely up to clear the hole, or what I like to do is kind of just take your coil, just push it down just enough to kind of see that post hole, and then that way you can fit your wire lead through there, and then you can pull that coil back up. Take your other coil, make sure you have the leads cut one longer than the other, and then go ahead and just kind of fish it through. Alright, so I got the coil in there. Take my coiling rod, pliers, pull on these leads. There we go. And once again, just kind of center the coil a little bit. Go ahead, grab your screwdriver and tighten off those post screws. Alright, so now we can cut the leads on this side. Oh, and watch out when you cut leads, because these wire leads do go flying and they might hit you in the eye. And then what you want to do is this is where a good pair of slim wire cutters come in really handy, because you kind of want to get behind this coil and cut that wire. If there's a little bit of wire lead sticking out touching this coil, you're going to have a little bit of a hot spot. Alright, so I kind of had to hop off camera to cut that lead so I could see what I was doing, but pretty much there you go. You should look something like that. So now we can go ahead, we can clean up these coils, straighten them out, compress them, and get this thing built. So what you want to do is just pretty much take your coiling rod, place it in there, and just kind of maneuver the coils a little bit more, kind of straighten them out, even them out, before we go ahead and dry fire this, or pulse it, whichever you guys want to call it. That looks about good right there. Alright, so we're looking good so far. Okay, so now that we have the coils mounted and screwed down, the next thing you're going to do, the very important thing before you do anything else, is you're going to want to check the resistance of the coil. Now, I recommend using an ohm meter. I know a lot of people out there like to use their mod or just kind of guess it. That's only for experienced builders. If you're new to rebuilding, I strongly recommend using an ohm meter. If you don't own one, go out, buy one. They're like 10, 15 bucks for a cheap one. It's much more safer to use an ohm meter than using your mod. But anyways, pop the atomizer onto your ohm meter, check the resistance on it. This one, we're looking at around a 0.42. Alright, so now that we know the resistance of our coil, we can go ahead, we can throw it onto a mod. I'm using this DNA 200 box. Got it set for around 33 watts. And before I fire it, you want to take your screwdriver or the back side of your tweezers and strum the coils. Just like you're scratching someone's back or you're strumming a guitar. Strum them one way, strum them the other. Kind of scratch them a little bit. Make sure you do the same thing to the actual leads itself. Kind of scratch the lead a little bit. Do the same thing for the other coil. And just make sure you do it to the entire coil. If you can't reach a certain part of the coil, go ahead, grab a different kind of tool, and just kind of scratch it up a little bit like this. What that's going to do is get rid of any hot spots, and it's going to make the coil light up, you know, much more evenly. It should glow from the inside out if you have a perfect coil. And make sure that you have your mod locked when you're building on it like I am. For me, I don't have it locked because I'm kind of, you know, used to doing this. But there has been times when I've been building on it and I'll hit the firing switch on accident and I'll end up burning myself. So it's a really good idea to lock your mod if you end up building on your mod. And another little pointer, little tip is people always wondering, well, how high do I have the coil off the deck? Like how far do I pull it up? Well, it really depends on the air hole, the placement of your air hole, how high it is. So for instance, this RDA, I'm using this top cap. What you could do is kind of rest the top cap like so, and then that can give you an idea and how far you want those coils to come off the deck. So you want the coil as close to the air hole as possible. The closer to the air hole, the better. Now, I know some people like to say, you know, pull your coils in to your post as close as you can get them, but I prefer to have my coil as far out as possible. Now, this particular build, you can see I don't have the coils going out that far, but I much prefer to have the coil farther out, closer to the air hole, just so that way when the air comes in, it directly hits that coil. What I like to do though, I slide the coiling rod through, I take the end of my tweezers, and I pretty much stick it under the coil like so, and that's usually the correct height. That's how you can tell how high you want your coils to be. So just pop that in there, and just do it like that, and that'll be the actual correct height of your coil. Usually. You always want to keep the coiling rod inside the coil so that way the coil never loses its form. So that's why I always try to keep a coil rod inside of there. There we go. Pull it out a little bit. Alright. Okay. Should look good there. Alright, looking pretty even. One's a little bit taller than the other. Not a problem. And then give it one last scratch. Trust me, doing this saves you a lot of time with hot spots. If you have issues with your coil heating up in you know, one particular spot, or it's getting too hot in another spot, doing this, it does miracles. Trust me. All right, I think we're ready to check it out. Just make sure there's no leads touching, and we're good to fire it. And just pulse fire it. Don't lay on it, because you might have some hot spots. I have it set pretty low. Now, as you can see, since I did the scratching technique, the coils are glowing pretty evenly right off the bat, but we still have some hot legs going on there. And what I call hot legs pretty much is the coil leg right here. This little leg, it lights up red, so that's what I call a hot leg. And you kind of don't want those, but if you get them, you get them. More than likely your cotton is going to be covering this little coil leg right here, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, so I'm going to turn up the wattage on this just a little bit. So I want to heat them up just a little bit more. There we go. And this is where the ceramic tweezers come in really handy. Now, if I was using a regular pair of tweezers and I went to compress the coil while I was firing the mod, you would short out the coil instantly and it would snap. But since we have ceramic tips, there's no metal on metal contact, so we're not going to short anything out. So as I fire the mod, I can go ahead and I can compress the coil. And do the same thing for this side. There we go. Now you can see it's still lighting up a little bit uneven, so we're just going to do a little scratchy poo. Let's give it a test fire. There we go. It's looking pretty good. Hot legs are down to a minimum. I'm pretty much satisfied with that coil. The end of the coil, like about right here, it's not heating up all that well. This last coil, for some odd reason, is always really hard to get it going. There we go. All right, we're looking good. All right, so pretty much there you go. There is a dual center post build. Now, there is another thing you can do. I'm not going to do it right now, but if you don't want the leg, you see how the leg is kind of extending across right here? Now, that's not really a big issue because when you put your cotton down here, it's going to cover it up. But if you wanted to, you could take your tweezers, trying to do this here, take your tweezers, and as you fire the mod, you could squeeze the coil right about there. And what that will do is that will bend that coil leg kind of inward right here. And it'll make it a little bit more kind of straight looking, and it won't be sticking straight out, but it will be closer to the positive post. All right, so let's talk cotton really quick. You know, there are at least 10 or 15 different cottons out there, if not more, and there's really no wrong cotton to use. As long as you're using an organic cotton, you're pretty much good to go. Everyone has their preference when it comes to cotton, but pretty much at the end of the day, it's all the same. You're not going to notice that much of a difference in flavor. Some cottons do wick a little bit faster than others. When it comes to cotton, my preferred one is Coil, the cotton sheets that you see right here. And these are the ones I've been using for quite a while. And I've tried a lot of other stuff. And even though it is good, I just much prefer to use the Coil or Cotton Bacon. Cotton Bacon version 2 is also really good to work with. But for the video, we're going to focus on the Coil. Alright, so with the Coil, what I prefer to do is remove the two outer layers. If you look at it, it almost looks like a sandwich. You got one real thin layer on each side. And what I like to do is just kind of pinch it, grab that real thin layer of cotton, grab it as thin as possible, and it should peel right off. Take that off, and I do the same for the other side. Now, some people don't like to do this because they say it's a waste of cotton, but honestly, once again, just like wire, cotton is pretty cheap. I think I paid 12 bucks for a box of Coil that lasts me, I don't know, maybe 6 months, if that. So I'm not too worried about that. And removing the outer sheets, the center of the cotton is more fluffier, just feels more like, I don't know, less machined. And it just seems to absorb much more efficiently when you're using just the center. So here's just the center of it right there. And when it comes to how much cotton you want to cut, you know, that's something I really can't tell you. It's something you got to kind of just kind of learn on your own. But you'll get the hang of it. I still don't actually have the hang of it yet, as long as I've been building. But I got a 2.5 diameter coil, so I kind of roughly know by looking at the cotton how much I need to cut. And I always use a dedicated pair of scissors for my cotton. I know that's kind of being real like OCD, but if you use nasty or dirty scissors, if your hands are nasty and dirty, all that's going to transfer to the cotton, and you're going to end up having a nasty flavor. So make sure your hands are clean, make sure your scissors are clean, make sure the surface you're working on is clean, because the cotton is going to pick up everything. What I'll do is I'll just fan the cotton out, and then I'll kind of roll it up into a wick form. So just kind of pull it apart as much as possible without pulling it apart. There we go. Looks about good. And what you want to do is just kind of roll it up into a wick form. And then that way it's even more absorbent doing it this way. You don't have to do this. This is kind of going over the top, but I just started trying this and it's pretty nice. Alright, so now we have something looks more like a wick. So what we can do is just check the resistance one more time on this thing. It should be pretty much right around where we started, but we'll just double check it. 0.45. So 0.45 is where we ended up at. Not too bad. Just wet the end of the cotton. Twist it up really super tight so you can fit it through that coil. And then all you got to do is just fish it through the coil. And there we go. Now you don't want the cotton, you don't want it too tight, and you don't want it too loose. You want a nice kind of semi-firm kind of tension to it. So if you're pulling on it and your cotton is like bundling up or ripping, it's too tight. What you want to do is just kind of stretch it out a little bit and just give it a tug. And if it feels too tight in there, if you got to really yank on it, like this feels a little snug. Oh, there we go. It's a little loose right there. So that feels pretty good. So, yeah, this is about a good amount of cotton. And I actually have another pair of scissors I use. These are smaller scissors, the Coil Master scissors that I use to cut. These are a little bit smaller, so it's a little bit easier to get in the little tight spaces and kind of cut the cotton. There's one, there's two, and just do the same thing for the other side. All right, and there we go. Now, that's probably a little too much cotton, but we'll kind of play it by ear and see how much we got to cut off here. Just, it looks like too much cotton. There's two different ways you can wick up your atomizers. You can fold the cotton in and you could fill the entire deck with cotton, or what I prefer to do is have just enough cotton to where when it folds down, the end of the cotton is hitting the deck. So that way, this portion right here is all open, and when the e-liquid kind of sits inside the deck, it easily gets pulled into the cotton from the bottom. So I try to just have the ends of the cotton just resting inside the deck. So it's always much easier to work with cotton when it's a little bit juiced up. So go ahead and grab your e-liquid of choice and just lube up the cotton just a little bit, just to kind of make it more manageable, easier to work with, and it doesn't like fray all over the place. And now all you got to do is you want to do like a tuck and roll type of thing. So just kind of pull the cotton up. You guys can see this, hopefully. Pull it up, kind of fold it to where you can get the end of the cotton kind of sitting right inside there. You guys see what I'm doing? Kind of folding it in there and then pushing it down. Trust me, trying to do this on camera is a real pain. Doing it off cam, much, much easier. But there gives you a general idea what I'm talking about. So I'm going to do the rest like that, and I'll show you the finished product. All right, and pretty much when the cotton's all tucked in and rolled in, it should pretty much look something like that. Now I have a little bit too much cotton, personally for my liking, because as you can see right here, the cotton kind of folded down onto the deck. I like it to where they just touch the deck. So I got a little too much cotton for my liking, but I mean, it's still gonna be a perfect vape. And you can go ahead and juice this up and adjust the cotton even more if you like. There you go, and just give it a few quick fires to kind of suck that e-liquid into the coils and the cotton, and then add a little bit more e-liquid. Let it suck it in. A little bit more. There you go. And if you keep the cotton nice and fluffy, if you don't pack it tightly in there, you can see how I have it nice and fluffy in there. The cotton will be really super absorbent. If you find that, you know, as you're dripping, the liquid is bouncing off the cotton and kind of just sitting in the deck, then that means your cotton is going to be too tightly packed in there. Now that looks pretty much perfect for me. There we go. Real nice vape. I like to flood my RDAs, so don't mind me. If it ain't leaking, it ain't got enough liquid in it. Alright guys, so there you have it. How to build the perfect microcoil. Let's jump back up and let's have a vape. Here is a cool website that you guys can use if you want to get a more accurate resistance on your coils. Let's say you're building a coil and you want to exactly nail a 1 ohm coil or a 0.8, and you're not too sure how many wraps you got to do, and you just want to get an idea of what your resistance is going to be before you make the coil. This website is www.steamengine.org. Links in the description. And the site looks confusing. Don't get me wrong. It looks really confusing, but it's really simple once you kind of figure out how to use it. If you hop on Steam Engine, you're going to click on the coil wrapping tab, and here's going to be all the information. And pretty much the way this works, just leave it set for metric, and it's going to ask for the type of wire you're using. For this video, I was using Kanthal wire. Canthal A1, so that's what it's set. That's what the default setting is for. Canthal, it's a round Canthal, so just leave that alone. If you're going to use stainless steel wire or something like that, you can change it in this drop down right here. But like I said, Canthal A1 is the basic Canthal. Now it's going to ask you what gauge wire you're using. So I'm using a 24 gauge wire, so we're going to change that 30 gauge to 24 gauge. All right, this right here, just leave that alone. Don't mess with it. And then it's going to ask you, are you doing a single coil or a dual coil? Now for this particular build, we did a dual coil build. All right, so dual coil right here. Now on the bottom right here, you'll notice that we have dual coil serial and a dual coil. Yeah, there we go, dual coil serial. This one right here is dual coil parallel, which is what we're going to do right now, which is what we just did. What that means is if you build one coil at 1 ohm and you build the identical coil, which is 1 ohm, and you install those two coils into an atomizer, your resistance is going to be half. So if those two coils were 1 ohm each, it's not going to be 2 ohms, it's going to be 0.5 ohms. So just half the resistance of that single coil. We got 24 gauge, we're doing a dual coil build. Now my target resistance, I didn't have a target resistance, so I'm just going to leave this kind of at 0. I'm not sure if I could set it to 0. Yeah, there we go. I'll set it to 0. Now, I remember my inner diameter was 2.5, all right? And the leg length, I'd leave that just kind of standard and default. It's set to 5 millimeters, which is about roughly accurate. So actually, I can't set this to 0. So my resistance on the build I did was 0.39. So we'll say 0.4. All right, so once you do all the math and all that jazz, it's going to tell you right here how many wraps each coil needs to be. 10 wraps each. So that's exactly what I did. I did 10 wraps, 2 coils, and I ohmed out to 0.39. As you can see here, 0.40. So it may sound a little confusing. Trust me, when I first started using this website a while ago, it was really confusing. But if you just kind of look at it a little bit, it gets really easy. And it's more for someone who wants to get an idea of what the resistance is going to be before they build it. It's more for the less experienced people. Really experienced builders kind of know what something's going to ohm out to before they build it. Let's say, for instance, you wanted to do a single coil at like 1.2 ohms. All right, you wanted a somewhat high resistance. So, and let's say you're going to use 28 gauge wire. So we'll change this to 28 gauge wire. Once again, just leave this alone. Canthal, regular round, nothing special. Select single coil. Now the resistance you want it to be is 1.2 ohms. And then it's going to ask you, well, what diameter is your coiling bit? What diameter is it? We're going to use the, let's use the 2 millimeter bit. And leave this alone. Don't need to mess with that. And pretty much it's telling you right here, number of wraps. 7 wraps on a 2 millimeter coiling bit of 28 gauge wire is going to get you 1.2 ohms. So it's pretty easy to use. It's a good tool to use if you're new to rebuilding, because it kind of familiarizes, how many wraps, what gauge, how large of a coil to build to get the resistance you're looking for.